Raising the Betts is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to Raising the Betts. We're a Catholic couple raising 5 kids outside of Boston. Join us as we share the joys and challenges of marriage, homeschool, and our adventures near and far as we make sense of the world and experience the best parts of our culture. I'm Don Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
So this is Advent. We have entered Advent, and we've just finished Thanksgiving. It's been a big week for us. So let's start with talking about Thanksgiving itself. Pretty quiet, generally. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't go to my brother's house, which was our usual custom. We stayed in.
It was nice.
Yeah. So first Thanksgiving without my dad. And my mom is in a nursing home, so she couldn't come out. So it was kind of weird. This is the new for us, I guess. For you, I mean, it's kind of funny. You've for 20 years basically have not gone home for Thanksgiving. You haven't been with your family for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, even before we were married, I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I mean, I haven't been home to Thanksgiving in
25 years.
A long time.
You've lived in Massachusetts now for like 25 years, isn't it?
Since 2000, 22
okay,
years.
22 years. So, yeah. I'm sure it's been a long time then. So, yeah, for you, you're used to not being with your family on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And honestly, going and visiting your family was sort of not the norm, because my family usually did Thanksgiving just
your immediate family.
Like,
you didn't have a lot of family in the Austin area most of the time.
Right. When I was little, for a while, like, we would occasionally do Thanksgiving with my Uncle Dan when they lived in the area, or with my Uncle Paul, my mom's brother. But most holidays were just us. So
I got up early as usual, got the turkey in the oven. And so we had the turkey, which came out pretty good this year, I think. It was nice and moist. And I made the gravy, and you made everything else.
Yeah, pretty much. I made a loaf of challah because that's our holiday bread.
Yep.
And
holiday bread.
I made some sweet potatoes and mashed potatoes and stuffing and pie.
You made
two kinds of pie.
Two kinds of pie, and I bought a pumpkin pie at the store because
I made pecan pie, which is my favorite, and apple pie because Lucy doesn't really like pecan pie. And apple pie is her favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And Bella really wanted a pumpkin pie, but I don't do pumpkin pie. So
pumpkin pie is kind of, I could take it or leave it. Like, I have a symbolic slice of pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving, but it's not like I would crave it or any other time. I guess, whereas I love pecan pie and apple pie, blueberry pie. What are the other 9 kinds of pie?
Key lime pie.
Key lime pie is okay. Anyway.
Key lime pie is one of my favorites.
Okay. So, yeah, so we had the pie, and then we had the mashed potatoes were really good because you put everything in that.
The mashed potatoes had sour cream and heavy cream and Mexican cheese blend and Parmigiano Reggiano and lots of butter.
There was definitely some potato in there, but it was balanced out with all the other fat and calories and sugars. Yeah.
Plus some scallions for color and
oh yes, you have to have some greens.
Yeah.
It was really good. I mean, you only eat them once a year, this kind of mashed potato.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because otherwise it's just way too much. And then the sweet potatoes were really good.
Yeah, this time I roasted the sweet potatoes whole, and then I peeled them and mashed them. I mashed them with butter and brown sugar and a little bit of nutmeg. But then I had some leftover lemon juice from something. The apple pie. From the apple pie. And I threw that in, and I also added a squirt of orange juice. And I think the citrus really makes the sweet potatoes pop.
Yeah.
They were good.
That was really good. We could have made twice as much, I think.
Right. I didn't make that many sweet potatoes because in the past they've not really been as popular. No, nobody's eaten them.
So after we finished eating, we were going to watch the season finale of Star Wars Andor, which had come out the day before. And
We did.
No, I know that's what our plan was. And then we decided to also watch a movie, and we decided on Pirates of the Caribbean because I think some of the kids weren't quite sure of it. Like they were a little worried, but it's slapstick, pirates, swashbuckling sort of.
I knew
nonsense.
They would love it. I mean, pirates, what's not to love?
Well, and Captain Jack Sparrow is,
yes.
They loved it. It was funny. They thought it was hilarious. Although partway into the movie, I'm sitting there going, what's that
noise?
What's that beeping noise? And then I realize it's the smoke detector. So
not just one smoke detector. It was all the smoke detectors in the house.
So when dinner was over and we cleaned up the dishes and packed away the leftovers, my usual thing is to take the turkey carcass, put it in a pot full of water, put it on the stove, and start simmering it to make turkey stock so that later on we could have turkey soup. We know this, right? We've talked about this before on this podcast. And so it turns out that we can't have a holiday without me doing some kind of damage. Let's see, on a Thanksgiving a while ago, not last year, but a couple years ago, I sliced my finger pretty good. Not on Thanksgiving itself, but when I was making the turkey soup the next day.
It was the day after Thanksgiving.
It was the day after Thanksgiving. And then there was that Easter, not this past Easter, I don't think. I think it was 2021, where I chopped off part of my finger trying to chop an acorn squash.
It wasn't an acorn squash.
What was it?
It was a funky squash that you'd picked up, like a turban squash or something.
Some kind of squash.
Yeah.
I was going to chop it with a cleaver, like really dramatically, and I didn't get my finger out of the way. And so
it was very dramatic.
That was very dramatic.
Oh, very dramatic.
So this time I didn't do any damage to myself, but what I had done was I'd put the pot on the stove, turned it on high to get it up to the boil, and then I was going to turn it down to simmer and just let it simmer. Well, I forgot. You
just turned it to simmer.
No, you got to bring it up to a boil and then down. Like you can't just, anyway. So I'd forgot. And I didn't realize we were going to watch a movie. So I would have come out afterward after Andor, but then we watched the movie. So it had boiled all the way. There was this really great like collagen at the bottom, like that really thick, but it was of course trash because it'd been all smoky. And like I'd taken the whole pot and just put it out on the patio and left it there overnight. I just didn't want to deal with it. And we had to open all the windows and doors and turn on the HVAC air, the fan to vent it out. And it was just nasty. And I was really upset because I like turkey soup and it was really disappointing. Not to mention, I did manage to clean the pot the next day. It wasn't ruined. I mean, in the end, there was no damage.
Other than the damage of our peace of mind.
No harm, no foul.
It smelled pretty foul.
It did smell pretty bad for a while. But then you cook and then the smells go away. But yeah, it did smell kind of burnt smoky for a bit. Yeah, so I want to make a smoked turkey, but not that way. No. So that was the adventure. And thankfully, that was it. Knock on wood. So that was Thanksgiving Day. Then Friday, I had work I needed to get done. I didn't work the whole day, but I had some work I needed to do. I don't think we did really anything Friday.
Friday was boring.
There was supposed to be that lantern walk. The Scouts have a thing where they do in the town forest. They line the trees with basically water bottles half filled with water with a glow stick inside, so it makes the forest kind of light up magically. They hang them from tree branches, and then you walk down the trail and you go to, there's a fire ring, and then they have like a fire ring thing where they have hot cocoa and they tell, I don't know, spooky stories or something. It was supposed to be weeks ago. It was going to rain, and then they rescheduled it for this Friday, but we ended up not going because it was at 5:30. Which is a weird time, like, because it's like right in the middle of dinner. So I don't know.
I was still cooking dinner, which that night was, well, since we didn't have turkey soup, I made turkey enchiladas.
I think you were happy to make turkey enchiladas. You prefer turkey
frankly,
enchiladas.
prefer turkey enchiladas to soup.
And they were good. We'll talk about this in a bit. And those were good. But yeah, in any case, but Saturday was my nephew's wedding. My second nephew to get married. If you recall from listening for a bit, we had a wedding this past summer. His brother, and then my nephew John Paul got married to his new bride Katie. And so John Paul is a U.S. Army officer. He's a Black Hawk helicopter pilot stationed in Savannah, Georgia. And so he was his longtime girlfriend. They've been dating for 5 years, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
He said they met working at Outback, which is kind of fun because it was that Outback was kind of a family restaurant job because not only did John Paul work there,
His mom worked there.
but his mom worked there. She was waiting tables. And then two of his brothers also worked there waiting tables. I don't know it all at the same time.
I think at the time that they got engaged or the time they met, it was just
John
mom.
Paul, his mom, and Katie. Right.
Yeah.
So it was a lovely wedding. It was at their parish St. Catherine's in Norwood, which is a beautiful parish that our family has a long time connection to. It's even though it's not in the same town where I grew up, my brother and his wife have always gone there instead of their local parish. They had connections to both priests and a prayer group that was there, and so it's just been their parish.
To the St. Catherine School,
huh?
Their kids all went to the St. Catherine
and then
School.
the kids all went to St. Catherine's School. So the connections to the parish go back many years. And then Father Ed, who used to be our pastor, who they knew from when he was a priest at that parish, he celebrated the wedding, and that was really beautiful. He did a really great job, and I loved his homily. Although Father Ed, when he preaches, he kind of whispers.
It was very quiet.
He's very quiet when he prays and he preaches, and you have to strain to hear him, which may be intentional. I don't know. So, so John Paul was wearing they call them pinks and greens.
There's no pink.
They're not pink, but the uniform is called pinks and greens. So it's an old uniform they're bringing back, or a new version of an old uniform.
It's retro.
If you've ever watched, like the one that Steve Rogers wears in the original original Captain America movie, the 1940s era khaki dress uniforms,
khaki pants, green,
khaki green blazer.
Yeah.
Like
it's a kind of an olive thing.
It's brown and brown. It's like greenish brown and brown. They call them pinks and greens. But in any case, he was wearing that uniform. It's not a standard like everybody wears them yet, but you can wear them.
They're going to phase them in by 2027.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
But he wanted to wear this particular uniform for the wedding, and so my brother Bernie, my other brother, not his dad, and my father, his grandfather, pitched in to buy him his uniforms when he was commissioned. So they bought his whole uniform package, like all of the different uniforms he needed, but they also bought this uniform for him to wear to the wedding. And let me tell you, it was pretty snazzy. It's a nice looking uniform. The other soldiers who were there, because all of his soldier buddies came, they were in the formal dress blues.
Yeah. So John Paul stood out. They were all in uniform, but he stood out because he was in the greens and they were in the blues.
Yes. Yeah. So that was really nice. And so then the reception afterward was nice. We sat at the table with my sister and her husband and three of their kids, and then my other sister and my brother Bernie and his wife. So that was nice. Oh, and my niece Katiri's fiance. Patrick was there as well. So, and they're next summer, I think.
Yep. Next summer.
Yeah. So it was nice. The reception was fun. A lot of loud music.
We ended up leaving early because my ears just cannot take the decibels.
We're such
anymore.
old people now.
I am an old person.
Why does it have to be so loud?
It is sad. But I had a really bad ear infection a few years ago and my eardrum burst.
Yeah.
And like my right ear hasn't been the same since. I just can't handle loud noises.
No, it was really loud. Like my watch, the Apple Watch does the thing where it can tell you like at 90 decibels, if you stay at this level for 30 minutes, you'll have temporary hearing damage. And it was like screaming at me all night. Like it's loud. It's loud. I know. So yeah, so we ended up, we left. I mean, we stayed through dinner and some of the dancing and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we stayed for cake for sure.
Cake and coffee. Yeah. So, yeah, it was nice. It was a good time. And then they have like a photo booth thing, like where they have a social media style photo thing. And so we took pictures with all my siblings, and that was fun. And then, it's interesting. They didn't do neither. I don't think Beth did this. Joe and Beth, my other nephew. I don't think that they did the throwing of the bouquet either. Did they?
No throwing bouquets.
So neither bride threw a bouquet. And none of the other, like the garter stuff or any of that other stuff, which is fine. That's kind of, even the cutting of the cake was relatively low key.
They didn't really announce cutting the cake. They did it while everybody was dancing.
Yeah. Or something. Yeah.
Or
eating dinner.
Like they just kind of did it.
And they came around to each table to greet everyone. They didn't do a receiving line or anything, which is probably better. It's easier that way. So it was really nice. It was a nice opportunity to get together with family, and we don't have as many opportunities these days to do that. So and then the kids, our kids, stayed here, had pizza for dinner, and watched Star Wars. So that was nice. So let's talk about some food that we ate besides Thanksgiving dinner, because we already talked about that. One of the things that we did this year was I usually do the food shopping on Fridays. I go to the grocery store on Fridays, and we've been trying to plan meals. This is what we're having.
Not terribly successfully.
Not successful until this past week, where we sat down and we said, okay, Friday night we're having salmon. Usually they have salmon on sale on Fridays at the grocery store, which is nice. So Friday we're having the salmon. Saturday we're gonna have bourbon chicken. Sunday we had pot roast from the Instant Pot, which turned out pretty good. It was a pretty good recipe that is Instant Pot roast, which we were making fun of because pot is occurs twice. It's from a website called lecremdelacrumb.com, and it's just you take a chuck roast, you put it in the Instant Pot, and you kind of brown it in there first, and then I kind of adapted some of the technique from the beef stew recipe I did before, which is I put it in there with some whole vegetables, whole carrots, whole celery, half an onion, and liquid, and pressure cook it for like an hour. Then I take it out, take out those vegetables, and then I put more vegetables in that are now cut up, and along with the meat, and finish it off for 15 minutes. And that way the vegetables aren't mush when they come out. And that worked out really well, I think.
It was tasty.
Yeah, that's a good method. So it wasn't fall apart tender. Like pot roast, you tend to think of like it shreds. This was still pretty solid, but not really chewy. It was pretty good. It was good.
Yeah, worked okay.
Yep, and it was a gravy with it. So that was Sunday, and I also made individual Yorkshire puddings in the muffin tin to go with it. So that was good. And then I think Monday we had pasta. Taco Tuesday. We did do Taco Tuesday.
We did.
And then Wednesday, because we're about to have a huge meal the next day, we wanted to keep it easy. We did fried rice. So whenever we have rice and leftover rice, at a meal, it goes in the freezer in a bag, and we end up with this huge bag, a couple of bags of Ziploc bags of rice, leftover rice, that then becomes fried rice, and so that worked out really well. And so I think we had a pretty good plan. And this week we have another good list of stuff we're going to have. So we had turkey enchiladas on Friday. The kids had pizza yesterday. We had roast beef today. Now, this was a roast beef as opposed to a pot roast. And then some other things we're going to have this week: chicken lemon soup, beef stroganoff, curry. And I have my eye on a recipe for a slow cooker white bean and tomato soup that looked interesting. So I'm going to give that a try and see how that comes out. So I think it worked out. I'm kind of happy with that. It does take some effort, and it takes some buy-in from the kids. We have to pull them. What do you want to have for meals this week?
Oh, I mean, in theory, we could do it without their buy-in. In practice, I can't think of enough like meal ideas without pulling them. So it's sort of more about like.
The downside is they'll choose the same thing every week. Anthony will ask for beef stroganoff every week. You know, I mean, and we also have to account for, like, on Tuesday nights with Scouts, we have to have a quicker meal. We have to get it done early so that we can, you know, get out in time to get to the Scout meeting. But in general, it's worked out pretty good. That and I think, you know, as long as we keep at it, Thursday night at dinner, we have to decide what we're going to have so that I can buy the ingredients the next day. You know, so I always try to make sure I want to make something new, a new recipe every week, one night a week. Not always successful with that, but that's my aim and goals. So that's what we've been eating. Let's talk about what we've been. He's falling asleep over here. Let's talk about what we've been watching or reading. Let's talk about Andor, the finale.
The finale of Andor was fabulous. That was some of the best TV I've seen.
So the series started a bit slow, a little bit. The first couple episodes, I think people were unsure about it.
I mean, I suppose the pacing was slow, but there was a lot of stuff going on, like, you know, Andor killing somebody, and, you know.
Yeah, it really starts off with a bang. But I think as it went on, it got better and better. I think it really built up to something. And by the end, it was, I mean, I've seen people talking about how this isn't just a good Star Wars series. This might be the best TV series of the year, like the best show on TV. And I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, it was so well written. I really enjoyed it. The speeches that were in the finale, there were a couple of different speeches
in the last couple of episodes.
Just
really good.
Compelling. The writing was so compelling. And it didn't feel like there was a lot of gimmickry going on. Not a lot of fan service. I mean, it's in the Star Wars universe, so that stuff is there, but it's not it didn't feel like gratuitous fan service.
I felt like, the real focus was the Star Wars galaxy is a really big place, and there are a lot of stories that we could tell. They don't all involve Jedis and lightsabers, and
right.
What does the Star Wars universe look like to everybody else?
I also heard some people complain that it was like it made the rebellion look less good guys versus the bad guys.
You know, I was talking about this with Isabella, and talking about how genre fiction often echoes or reveals the concerns of its day.
Yep.
And if the Star Wars of my youth was very shiny and idealistic for the most part,
it was very clear, black and white.
Yes. I think that, you know, if you look at, well, for example, the narrative that's going on about the American Revolution and the founding of our country, we're a lot more interested in the nuances, the dark side, the underbelly, and telling those stories. And so I think it makes sense that when we look back at the stories of our youth, that we kind of say, you know, there's probably a dark side here, because there is in most things. Like, rebellion comes at a cost.
Well, at a moral cost.
Right.
Well, and also, what was going on in 1977 was the Cold War, and you had the evil empire of the Soviets versus the good guys in the West. And it was very clearly, at least the general narrative was good guys versus bad guys. Now, what you have now, you know, in the world today is you have this, it's the terrorists, and you have America, you have Russia, it's China, it's multipolar, it's complex. And like you said, we've also been exposed to, you know, sometimes the good guys do things that aren't so good in the service of good. They do some bad in the service of good, and the bad guys are still bad guys, but the good guys sometimes cross a line to get to. And we were talking about the John le Carre novels.
Yeah. Right. Actually, so I after I finished reading The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, I remember that the Close Reads podcast had done a series on that. And I thought the discussion of that novel was really one of their best, top-notch discussion, including like I was saying about like genre fiction. One of the hosts, David Kern, proposed a radical reading, I thought. He said that he thought that in some ways genre fiction is more important than literary fiction. He said that, we don't have a popular, we don't have folk tales and fairy tales and mythology really in our culture. Like, we don't tell folk tales. But what serves that place culturally is genre fiction, whether it's romances or mysteries or westerns or science fiction and fantasy or horror. Like, all of those genres have their particular sets of tropes, just like fairy tales do or myths do. And yet it's what writers do with them that kind of, it's an investigation into the concerns of the culture. And we're able to have these discussions about these current concerns within the confines of the genre, like hitting all the, the notes. I really liked that idea that whether it be superhero movies or detective fiction, it tells you something about who we are now. If you look at what's being written now, what's being discussed now, it tells you what we're concerned about. I really liked that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Andor really is about, where's the line, what clearly the Empire is evil, but what evil can you do is acceptable in trying to get rid of it. That's the moral quandary that's getting built into this, and that we heard about in Rogue One to begin with.
Right. Yeah. Andor is really a continuation of the same sorts of questions that Rogue One did. But I think it's got more scope to develop. Because it's a series has a lot more time to spend than a movie does.
Yeah.
And I think what they did with it was really good. Like, they picked up a lot of the concerns from Rogue One, and then they just really went deeper.
Right. In Rogue One, Cassian Andor, tells Jyn Erso, I've done a lot of bad things for the sake of the rebellion, things that he's not proud of, things that he regrets. And so going with her to Scarif to get the Death Star plans is his way of making up for it and getting back to the roots of what the rebellion is all about. And yet,
well, for all the talk about the darker side of it, I thought that the series also had a lot of really great hopeful moments and positive, like Nemik's manifesto. I think he's sort of almost the Thomas Paine or the Alexander Hamilton of the Star Wars rebellion. Like, he's writing the
philosophical underpinnings.
Yeah. And I thought what he said about rebellion and tyranny, oppression, it was really amazing.
Isn't it true that all revolutions have the intellectuals to support it? They have the firebrand. They have the guy who's willing to do whatever it takes to defeat the enemy, because it's not so much whether we win or not, but that we just attack the enemy. And, this all the different kinds of people with all the different motivations and all the different ways of being part of it. I've read a lot about the American Revolution, and it was like that then. Like you said, you had your Thomas Paines, you had your Benedict Arnold, who before his treason was, a very successful military officer. Then you had, you Ben Franklin, and you had George Washington. You had all the different kinds of ways that people were contributing to the war effort in all the different levels. And so we're seeing that, like with Andor, you see all the different kinds of ways of contributing. And I really felt like Nemec, who when we first see him, is kind of he almost seems naive,
right?
What's the callow youth? He's young and idealistic, and you kind of like, oh, tut, But his manifesto at the end, he's like written this manifesto for rebellion and freedom. His manifesto at the end, you hear it and you go, this could have become the manifesto for the rebellion. This could have been the inspiration for many people joining the rebellion.
Well, and maybe it was, and we just haven't heard of it before now.
Right. And maybe we will see that actually in the future, in a future season. So, really can't say enough about Andor. Such a great series, and looking forward to the next season.
And so I'd read somewhere that in an interview that they started with developing the finale.
They started with the events of the finale first.
Right. And I feel like that showed, because when we watched the finale, I said, everything is coming together right here, right now. All the threads,
both literally and figuratively.
Right. All the threads from the whole season come together right there in one. It was tight.
Yeah.
And I think that it made sense, like that's how they wrote it, like working towards that or working back from that, because it was so tight.
Even the music in the climactic scenes, the music was a combination of musical motifs that had been part of all the previous episodes.
Although again, that's because they worked backwards. They nailed the music for that final scene, and then they used those motifs in the rest of the show, so that by the time you get to that final scene, everything comes together. And it just, even though you're not consciously paying attention to the music, subconsciously you feel like it's all coming together. It's all come to a head. And
right.
That was just, it was brilliant.
So I've been watching another new series on Apple TV Plus, which Apple TV Plus has quickly gone from being sort of a sort of oddball little service to being a real contender for must have. They don't have a lot, but what they do have is almost always good. And like we talked about that movie with Ewan McGregor recently, and there's that series Slow Horses is coming back for a second season. So really good. So I've been watching this new series there called Echo 3. And it's about this brother and sister, and he is special forces in the army. He's a Delta Force. In fact, I think they come out and say it at one point. And one of his buddies in the unit is marrying his sister. Now this buddy, his codename is Prince. The brother is named Bambi. And Prince is the son of this ultra wealthy defense contractor guy. It's a little unrealistic because a guy like that would be he'd be an officer. And my understanding, I mean, Delta is very secretive. My understanding is most of the actual on the ground special operators tend to be enlisted, senior enlisted. They don't tend to put the officers on the front line like that. But be that as it may. So that's one of the first unrealistic bits. So the sister is a scientist who's researching psychotropic drugs as treatment for addiction, which I think is a real thing. I think I've heard of that. And she goes to native communities, primitive native communities that use psychotropic drugs in rituals, and researches their use of them as she's trying to find their whatever. So she ends up in places like in Colombia and, South America and Africa and that sort of, in Asia, that sort of thing. So she's in Colombia and she gets kidnapped by rebels. And so the brother and the husband have to go down there to try to rescue her. And it's okay so far. Like the first couple episodes, I was a little bit, this seems unrealistic. There's all these weird things. Like we start with the wedding. They're at the wedding, and in the middle of the wedding, they get a call that they have to go in the morning, fly out to do a hostage rescue. And I'm like, if he was getting married, he'd be on leave. Like they wouldn't have him flying out like the next day. He'd be on leave. They'd find somebody else. It's not like there's only 8 Delta Force guys in all the world. You know, I mean, it's just, so it seemed a little unrealistic. And the typical unrealism of somebody gets shot and then 3 months later they're back like nothing happened. The characters seem a little flat. I don't know. Again, especially in the first couple episodes, I've only seen the first 3 or 4 episodes, and it was at the end of part 1. So I don't know what that means. If there's like another episode in a week, or if it's going to be another 6 months or something, but, it seemed a little flat. And even like the woman who's captured, she seems to veer between like being strong and self-sufficient and being weirdly clueless. It was kind of odd, and I didn't understand what they were trying to do with the character, and I kind of disliked her, which is a bad thing for the person you're supposed to be rooting for them to save. So it was kind of odd. So I'm watching it. I'm kind of curious where they're going with it, but we'll see how it goes. It stars Luke Evans. He's the only one I really recognize as a major actor. You might have seen him in the Hobbit movie as Bard the Bowman. I always say boatman. He is a boatman, but he's Bard the Bowman. Anyway, then of course we watched Pirates of the Caribbean, which we talked about.
Yeah, it's goofy. It's fun. The only thing that really actually drives me crazy is the whole anti-corset thing, which just is so.
I can see you out of the corner of my eye when she's talking about how can one breathe in these things. Oh, it's like that's
like, well, one, the whole thing, like she gets her father buys her this new dress and she looks at the corset and she's like, never seen a corset in her life. I'm like, a woman in that day and age would have been wearing a corset since she was like a little child, not tight laced, but wearing a corset. Dresses were not designed to be worn with like super tight lace. So the idea that she would have to be tight laced in order to fit into the dress was also ridiculous.
Right.
And then like the whole, like she faints because like she can't breathe because she's laced so tightly into her corset. And I'm like, no, women, even working women, like servants wore corsets to work in. They carried things. They lived normal lives. Corset does not mean I'm tight laced into it and I can't breathe.
Could you imagine like in 100 years, like whatever the equivalent of TV then, depicting like wearing underpants as like somehow constricting, and oh, how could you possibly be forced to wear underpants? It's so constricting, and oh, it's awful. It's like,
right?
It's like we would go, it's underpants. Like, no, ew, why would you not wear one? You know, and I'm sure women of that era, where do they just see this stuff today, would say similar things.
Like, have you, like, it's just kind of weird, this mythology that has developed. Now, I mean, yes, during a particular time in history, there was a fashion for small waists, and some highly fashionable women, you know,
they did the weird, like, over tightened corset.
Tightened, tight laced, but that's like the equivalent of women getting breast reduction surgery or breast enhancement surgery or something. Like it's not everybody. It's a few people who have more money than sense.
Right. Because you've told me before, corsets were not constricting.
No, they weren't.
They were supportive.
It's like, well, a bra, or I mean, they're not even as constricting as like those things that like women today put themselves in, like shapewear. They were far less constricting than shapewear.
Right.
So
I'm not even sure what that is, but
yeah.
You obviously don't use it. Yeah, it's very strange. It's funny, the things that are sort of, we accept as common knowledge from our common watching of movies and TV shows that are a complete myth. It came up this week at Scouts. They were doing, they were learning about CPR. Uh-huh. And there was one of the dads is actually a former EMT, and he was talking about the the defibrillator device.
Uh-huh.
And he says one of the things that it's a huge myth is they don't, you see on TV, he's flatlining, give him the defib. And he's like, you don't defib someone who's flatlined. That's not what it's for. It's not a jump start. It sends a shock when the heart is out of rhythm, and different parts of the heart are firing at different times and thus not pumping blood because they have to fire all in sequence. When they're out of sequence, you kind of shoot a bolt of electricity through it to kind of say, this is when you start, and they all get the bolt. And so the heart has to be beating for it to be effective. Otherwise you're just shocking a dead heart, like an unbeating heart. And it's one of those things like we've seen it for so long. This is how TV shows and movies are written. Like if you were to do it the right way, people go, that's wrong,
Right. Even though it's correct.
It's kind of funny. I'd love to see. I wonder if someone has. Well, I shouldn't say I wonder.
It's the internet.
It's the internet. Someone has created a list of all these myths and tropes of things that in real life are completely different from the way they are in movies. Not even just like unrealistic, like firing guns that never run out of bullets, but things like defibrillators or corsets or that sort of stuff. I'd be kind of interested to see what else is out there about that. Anyway, Pirates of the Caribbean, totally unrealistic. Obviously, it's a cartoonish movie.
Oh yeah, from the depiction of who pirates were and what they were doing. I mean, it's obviously
right.
High fantasy because there's a curse and they're like all zombie pirates. So
right. And even the sailing
spoilers.
of ships and how long it takes to get from here to there and how the British Navy worked and all that sort of stuff.
And the ability for two guys to actually sail a ship with no other crew.
Well, the smaller ship. Yes. They had to sail the smaller ship without a crew. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was silly, but,
no, but I it's the kind of silly that it is fun.
Yeah, you had Legolas and Keira Knightley and that whole thing. It worked out. It was pretty good. So, and then you had a book you wanted to talk about that you've read.
Actually, I don't know that I have much to say about it. I read Barbara Pym's Excellent Women, which it's kind of a quiet, quirky little novel. So the protagonist is sort of a mousy nobody. She's the daughter of a clergyman and she's single, and she seems to be destined to be single for her entire life. Like marriage just does not seem to be in the cards for her, nor does she seem to be especially interested. And she's like she's a church lady. Like she, lives near the church and she helps out with the parish jumble sales, and she's good friends with the vicar and his sister, and basically the plot revolves around this couple moves into her building, and they sort of like she gets sucked up into their lives, and they have a marriage that's kind of on the rocks, and she ends up getting caught up in their drama.
Okay.
And she's kind of got a crush on the husband, but then they end up getting back together again, and she ends up not marrying the vicar, despite the fact that everybody in the parish thinks that she should be marrying the vicar.
Mm-hmm.
And she really doesn't end up with anyone. Like it's an anti-romance. She ends up agreeing to continue to help the vicar and maybe help sort out his life after he had a disastrous engagement, which ended up breaking.
Right.
And then there's one other guy who seems to be possibly a romantic interest, and he ends up asking her, he's an anthropologist, and he ends up asking her to help copy edit his manuscripts and do his index for him. And he's not interested in her romantically, and she's not really all that interested in him romantically. And it's kind of, the title comes up several times, the idea of the excellent women, and the excellent women are the church ladies without whom the church would not function. But they're the women who the men are interested in for what they can do, but they are not interested in marrying them. Like the excellent women are the non-marriageable women. Oh, she's an excellent woman. but I would never consider marrying her, is the sort of the subtext.
Right. It's described as a comedy of manners.
You know, comedy was I maybe am not immersed enough in British culture because there was very little that struck me as funny, like quirky, weird.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I'm just like, all the humor is going over my head and I'm just taking it at face value when I'm supposed to be laughing at its skewering of conventions.
No, it was published in 1952 and set in that contemporary period.
So it's very circa 1950s. And maybe that's also part of it. It just feels like a historical novel. And therefore I'm missing like the humor.
Yeah. I mean, this says it was her funniest and most successful of her comedies of errors.
You know, I keep going back to Barbara Pym because a lot of people love her. And I feel like I am perhaps not her intended audience because it kind of felt sad to me. Like,
interesting.
But, you know,
yeah,
maybe I will find somebody who will explain it to me and I will suddenly understand what brilliance I am missing.
You also have a kind of a quirky sense of humor.
I suppose.
You have a particular sense of humor. Just put it that way.
Yeah.
So I am.
You mean
amused.
I don't think you're funny?
Yes. I'm looking at this plot summary, and I'm amused that the anthropologist is named Everard Bone.
Yes.
He's an anthropologist's name is Bone. That is kind of amusing.
Well, there's a whole thing about how he occasionally goes to meetings of archaeologists, and that's sort of like the other anthropologists is like, well, he only does that because he knows it annoys me because I would never do that. But our protagonist, meanwhile, doesn't really know what an anthropologist is.
Right.
So it has to be explained to her.
Apparently, the phrase "excellent women" is from Jane Austen.
Is it
from Sanditon?
Oh, I haven't really read Sanditon. That's her early unpublished novel that has been unearthed.
I see. So that's where the phrase first used, I guess. In any case, so that's what we've been reading and watching. So let's talk about Advent.
Okay.
Advent is here. Advent has begun. The Advent candles are on our dining room table. We did not put the purple cloth on the altar.
I asked somebody to do that. And nobody did.
No one did that.
I am not good at the whole liturgical living thing because that just requires way too much.
Too much executive function?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes one child or another will take it into their heads to get interested in something, and then it happens.
We do what we can, little by little. Oh, I forgot to put my Lego Advent wreath out on my desk. I need to do that still.
Well, it's early days.
Yes.
Lucy said tonight that she did not think it felt like Advent yet. It doesn't really feel like Advent until later in Advent.
It really, not until, is it Gaudete or Laudete? I can never remember which is which. Gaudete is in Advent, right?
Yes.
So to me, it really doesn't feel like Advent until Gaudete Sunday. Like you're in the home stretch to Christmas. I mean, that is really it's the switch over.
I suppose.
Well, because as Father Matt said in his homily, the first 2 weeks of Advent are about the four last things. It's about the second coming, which is kind of funny because it's about the second coming, because then the second half of Advent is about the first coming.
Right.
So, these first 2 weeks, we're talking about
death,
heaven, hell, death, and purgatory, our own death, the end of time, that sort of stuff. But the next 2 weeks will be about Jesus is coming as a child and Christmassy. And it kind of feels like that's the turn, which is why we have Gaudete, that Sunday in the middle. So he did say a couple interesting things. Well, he said more than a couple, but a couple of things we both latched onto. He said the first line of the creed is the most radical statement of all, because we say, I believe in one God.
Right.
In the ancient world,
he connected it to the phrase from the first reading, Mount Zion shall become the tallest mountain.
Right.
Mount Zion should be called the tallest mountain. So
Because it's not actually the tallest mountain
in
anywhere.
fact, it wasn't even the tallest mountain in ancient Israel. Like they
Right.
knew many taller mountains. So this was
Symbolic.
symbolically, it would become the tallest mountain because the ancient gods, Semitic gods, were worshipped on tops of mountains.
Not just Semitic. I mean, Mount Olympus and
Right.
that sort of stuff.
So in the ancient world, people went up to the tops of mountains, and they often believed that gods lived on the tops of the mountains.
If you wanted to get close to the heavens, you had to go up.
Right. So the idea of Mount Zion becoming the highest mountain is that God is the God above all other gods.
And he's one God. He's the one God.
Right.
To worship one God to the exclusion of all others was, and frankly still is, unusual.
Right.
I mean, it was unlike all the others. Even the Romans, well, you have your God, the Jewish God, but we have all of our gods. And, it's okay for you to worship your God, but, we have our gods.
The Romans did not understand the idea of refusing. Like the Romans never met a God that they didn't like.
Oh, no.
They baptized, in a sense, or they incorporated every God they met. So they went to Egypt.
They culturally appropriated everybody.
Right. They went to Egypt and they culturally appropriated Ra, and they said, well, he's just another name for Jupiter, or
yeah.
And they loved religion. The Romans loved, they were perfectly willing to accept and
every
adopt.
Religion.
Right. They're perfectly willing to adopt the Hebrew God. The problem was that the Hebrews were like, no, there's only one of them, and you have to give up all the other gods, and you can't worship any other God. And they were like, it did not compute.
Yes, that seems exclusionary. You need to be more diverse.
You might tick off one of the other gods. Like, why would you do that? You're going to get them mad at you.
You are studiously observing my bomb throwing, or studiously ignoring my bomb throwing. So, yes, well, Mithras was the other one. Like they loved Mithras, the Mithras cult of the bull god. Who, So anyway, so the Jews were like, nope, there's one, and of course the Christians same way. There's only one God, and the idea of saying that is a pretty radical saying. Now, today, there's not as much about polytheism, although, interestingly, it's coming back. But it's more about that the statement is radical today because we make other things into God. We've all heard this before. We make a God of our work. We make a God of our appetite. So we make a God of whatever it is.
Money, power, prestige.
Money, power, sex, other religions, that sort of stuff. The usual list. And so to say, I believe in one God to the exclusion of all other things that people worship, that's radical. That's still radical. And even more so today than it used to be, perhaps. So that was really good. He also pointed out how in the gospel, it talks about how, if the master of the house had known the hour of night when the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into, because we need to know the hour the Son of Man is coming. And he mentioned how in the Bible, sleep is symbolic, a spiritual blindness, or even death. And so the sleeping master is spiritually blind, is spiritually inobservant. No, this was the master of the house had known the hour of night when the thief was coming.
Oh, right.
It's always interesting to me how Jesus compares himself to the coming of the thief.
Jesus is the thief who's going to come to.
Right. He's sneaking into our house, breaking in. I mean, kind of like Santa, right? Santa does breaking and entering in millions of homes every year. So it's kind of interesting to see that in there where he talks about, we need to be awake, spiritually awake, and ready to see. So anything left you want to say about that? Pretty straightforward. You might be able to. We're both kind of tired from the late night at the wedding. It was a long day. I always find it interesting, Scott Hahn's reflection on this gospel, where he talks about that Jesus exaggerates. He says, no one knows the hour of the day but the Father. Even I don't know. He kind of implies that even he doesn't know. But of course, Jesus would know, but not he's making a point. So he's sort of exaggerating there. Yeah. So, and I like the idea. I mean, we have to be ready at all times. Like, you can't just say, as I've actually heard people say, well, later in my life, I'll get more religious. Later in my life, I'll convert. I'll convert when I'm old, or like, dude, you don't know. You could step off a curb in front of a bus tomorrow. You could drop dead of a heart attack.
One thing Father Matt said was that death is like the pop quiz that you didn't expect.
Yeah. I like that.
I remember thinking that my kids have no experience of that and do not know what a pop quiz is.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's the thing in school anymore. I was thinking of the movie Speed. Pop quiz, hot shot. What do you do with the Keanu Reeves? And I had his name right at the tip of my tongue, but I forget now. The bad guy in that one, Dennis Hopper. Pop quiz, hot shot. So, and yeah,
I don't remember that. I mean, I remember that there was a movie called Speed and it was Keanu Reeves on a bus, but that's
with
what was her name?
Oh, I can't believe I can't remember her name. I keep thinking Marissa Tomei, but it's not. Anyway, I'm really bad with names. So, what's your name? Anyway, so so that's the first reading of the first set of readings for the first Sunday of Advent. It's a nice way to start. It sort of clears the decks. We're starting a new year, new you, and it's. I mean, I really like this feeling of a new year, the new liturgical year. It's a fresh start. I know that people look at Lent as a way to kind of fresh start things, and it kind of is. I feel like Advent is for me even more so, but that's just my feeling on it.
I feel like I want Advent to be a fresh start, but there's just so much to do for Christmas that I feel like that gets lost in the shuffle. And I know it shouldn't.
Right.
But it kind of does. Like, I have great resolutions for Advent, and then just the busyness of life gets in the way of all of my intentions.
I mean, that's kind of the nice thing about Lent is it's not like you have to do. We have Easter Sunday where we go and we have a big dinner and all this sort of stuff, but it's not like there's a lot of Easter related stuff you have to do for all of Lent,
People aren't throwing Easter parties during Lent.
Right. You're not having an Easter party in April.
Although nowadays you have that more popping up, like the Easter egg hunt on Palm Sunday.
Yeah.
I saw advertisements for, and I'm just thinking, it's not Easter yet. You're not supposed to have your Easter egg. So I feel like it's starting to creep in, but we're not really there yet.
So, yeah. And this is one of the reasons why I like our celebration of gift giving to be primarily on Epiphany, because then all that doesn't have to be in Advent, all the preparation for gift giving. Although we did really good. I know our kids sometimes listen to the podcast, so I'm not going to say too much. But over this past summer, we did some good shopping. Let's just say we got a lot of stuff. So we got a lot done ahead of time, which is completely unusual.
I feel like there's a lot more to do, but
well, this is the downside is if you're not disciplined about it, then you get to Advent and you're like, you still buy all the same stuff, do all the same stuff that you were supposed to prepare for. I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
So can I end with a poem?
You may end with a poem.
Okay. So you actually read this one to me earlier today.
I read her a poem. Isn't it romantic?
A poem. Very nice. So it's a poem for the first Sunday of Advent by the poet Malcolm Geet, who we talked about
last week.
And he's riffing on the first of the O antiphons, O Sapientia. But it's really when we think of the O antiphons coming at the end of Advent, like the last 7 days, but it's appropriate for the beginning as well. So, O Sapientia, I cannot think unless I have been thought, nor can I speak unless I have been spoken. I cannot teach except as I am taught, or break the bread except as I am broken. O mind behind the mind through which I seek, O light within the light by which I see, O word beneath the words with which I speak, O founding, unfound wisdom, finding me, O sounding song whose depth is sounding me, O memory of time reminding me, my ground of being always grounding me, my maker's bounding line defining me. Come, hidden wisdom, come with all you bring. Come to me now, disguised as everything.
Very nice. Happy Advent, everyone. So before we go, we want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Raising the Betts, including Joshua G., Doyle and Dan A., John S., Rebecca S., and Gabe S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Raising the Betts and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Write a review at Apple Podcasts and share the podcast with your friends to help us grow our community and reach more listeners. Until next time, I'm Dom Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
Thank you for listening to Raising the Betts on StarQuest. Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy, The Secrets of Middle-earth. Find it wherever you can find podcasts or at sqpn.com/Middle-earth.